Hello, my name's Mark McKean with the 10 Acre Woods. Today I'm going to do something a little bit differently. During the week I'm actually a certified mold and asbestos inspector, and I often go into homes where tenants and homeowners don't know why mold is growing where it is and what they can do to prevent it. So in this video I'd like to show you and give you the tools on how to find mold, why it's there, but most importantly how to prevent it from happening. So why does mold grow in our home? Mold is caused by excess humidity in our home due to foundation leaks or plumbing leaks. It even comes from cooking, showering, and even breathing. A good way to find out what the humidity is in your home is simply by having a temperature and humidity gauge. I recommend a digital one. Analog ones, from my experience anyway, have not been as accurate as digital ones. You want to make sure you get a good quality unit that's going to be fairly accurate. You want to keep your humidity below 50%, and in the cold winter when it's below freezing, down below 40%. This will ensure that you won't get condensation on cold surfaces. That can lead to mold growth. Now, why is it condensating on windows and walls? Well, warmer air holds more moisture than cold air. So when that warm air from your home gets up onto those edges, let's say a window, where the air is quite a bit cooler in those areas, then the moisture content remains the same, but the cooler air cannot hold as much moisture. So the humidity, or relative humidity to the temperature, is higher in those areas, causing condensation on the windows. Now this can also happen in areas of your home if you have furniture that is up against walls, exterior walls primarily, or if there is a lack of air circulation in those areas. So one thing that I ask people is, do they leave their furnace fan set to the on position? So if you have a forced air furnace, it is important to have it on during the winter months. Actually, summer as well. Many people do use it in the summer to bring that cooler air up from the basement to cool down the upstairs. Then they don't have to run their air conditioner as much in the spring or in the fall. You don't want to go below 30% relative humidity. Wood in homes require some moisture, and by dropping it below 30% humidity can cause doors to warp or even not close properly. You'll find this in older homes that breathe very well, but the problem now is newer homes or homes that are older that have been refurbished with new windows, maybe a high efficiency furnace, maybe new insulation and vapor barrier. Taking that older, more breathable house, closing it in, and causing moisture or humidity problems. Now here we are in the basement. Now if you're like me and live in the country, you may have something like this. This is a water softener. Back behind my water heater I have a pressure tank to maintain pressure in my home from my well. This is a very good example of how condensation can form. The groundwater in the earth is approximately 11 degrees when it comes out of the ground. Now, it cools this cylinder. This is a fiberglass cylinder. It's called a resin tank. It will also do the same thing to the pressure tank, lowering the temperature of that tank. And the humidity in the air, the warm humidity, then goes and condensates on the tank. Now, I've done many inspections in country homes and found that this tank is covered with mold. It's black instead of the beige color that it is now. Quite often on tanks, on pressure tanks as well, you'll get spotting patterns, usually around the bottom of it, closer to where the water runs along through there. So that's something you want to look for, and if you do see mold in those areas, you can actually treat non-porous areas like this fiberglass or like the steel tank, the pressure tank, simply with vinegar and water. Put some vinegar into a spray bottle, spray it on the surface, and then after about 10 minutes, warm soapy water to remove all that from there. Now this won't work on drywall, on wood, on concrete, plaster, and other porous areas, as the mold actually grows into those structures. Here on a fiberglass tank, on metal, on glass, as in your windows and windowsills if you have PVC windows, it actually grows on the dust and debris that's on the surface. It doesn't actually grow into the tank. So that's a great recommendation on how to get rid of and make sure that it's dead. Now, why is it there? How do I get rid of it? Well, airflow is key. So most furnace rooms don't have ventilation. They don't have vents from the furnace going into those areas. So what can you do there? You can contact a furnace installation company and have them install some vents in those areas. Or you can run a dehumidifier in that area. Set your dehumidifier to 35–40% and let it run in that area to remove any excess moisture so that you prevent condensation from occurring on these surfaces. So what type of dehumidifier should you buy? You want to make sure you're buying the correct one for the size of home. Now, if you have a 2,000 square foot home, this includes the main floor and the basement, then you want to look at a 70-pint dehumidifier. Now this one here hooks up to the hose and goes into a floor drain. So you don't have to worry about emptying the pail all the time or forgetting about it. Or if you go away on holidays, it can be removing moisture from the air even when you're away. You just want to make sure that you check the filters, clean them regularly. Now, how do I tell how strong this is or how much moisture it pulls out of the air? Generally, if you look on a label, you turn it around, maybe on the back or even inside the drawer area, you'll see a little decal. And this decal is actually right here. This unit is rated for 35 pints per day. Now, of course, my home is larger than 2,000 square feet. So why do I have a dehumidifier that's only rated at 35 pints per day? Well, I live in a newer home and I have what's called an HRV, which is a heat recovered ventilator. So that works during the winter months, bringing in the cold, dry air from outside and heating it with the warm, stale air as it leaves. So this dehumidifier actually doesn't even get used in my home during the winter months, as the HRV takes care of that. Primarily, this unit is to maintain a drier environment inside this small area of my furnace room where my water system remains. Furnace ventilation in your basement. Quite often, basements are finished by the homeowner and may not have the skills required to properly install ventilation throughout the basement. Now you can see here above me there is a vent in the ceiling. That vent actually has a diffuser on it, which will blow the air across and throughout the room more evenly. Now quite often I'll go in for inspections and I'll see these kind of vents without the diffuser and with a rag or a bag covering that. Now quite often people will say, well, I don't use the basement that much. We don't spend a lot of time down there. So we're going to save a couple dollars and we're going to leave the heat off downstairs. What then happens is you lower the air circulation in those areas. That area in the basement gets cooler, and that warmer air from upstairs goes down, condenses, settles on cool surfaces in the basement, and remains there because there is no air movement throughout the house. So always ensure that you have good airflow throughout your house and around items, especially up against exterior walls. Something else that's overlooked are vents, floor vents. It's always good to have ventilation pulled from the floor rather than from the ceiling. Quite often people will cut a hole in the vent or the main and install a ventilation cover or a grill. What happens here is the warmest air of the basement actually goes back into the furnace and is circulated and warmed back up and redistributed. But what happens is that air down low stays there and stays cool and stagnant. And that's why you get moisture forming and remaining on these surfaces. So it's always important to have a vent on the floor which can be used through an inside wall cavity to draw that air back up into the furnace and warm the air completely and circulating it throughout the house, not only across, but up and down as well. Now you may be asking, well Mark, I don't have a forced air furnace, so how do I promote air movement throughout my home? Well, this can be done a few different ways. You may need to look at getting a couple more dehumidifiers and having a few of them. Maybe one in the basement, one upstairs, one on the main floor, or even fans. Just having fans running throughout areas that don't have proper ventilation is a good idea. Now, something that people often find as homeowners, they buy a house or maybe they've been living in it for a while and they want to do some renovations. They want to get rid of that old paneling from the basement wall. So what they do is they remove the wall covering, be it paneling or drywall, and they open up the studs and they pull out the old drywall, or sorry, the old insulation, and they find on that concrete mold growth and even moisture and frost in a lot of cases. So why is that there? There's a vapor barrier to protect that. Well, what people don't look at is up in the joist cavities, that stud framed wall is actually built a couple inches away from the concrete. And that's to prevent moisture from the concrete from wicking into that board and causing premature rot. So what happens is there's vapor barrier, there's insulation, and there's a wall covering, but right at the top on the joist cavity, I can often reach up and over top of that wall framing and touch the concrete, the cold concrete, quite often with frost and moisture on it. So in these situations, when finishing off a basement, make sure you look at that joist cavity. Even in this home, which was built in 2008, the contractor who I left in charge of a lot of the construction only threw up fiberglass insulation into those joist cavities. And that fall, or that fall winter, I found frost in the corner of my master bedroom. Couldn't figure out why until I pulled out that area and I found frost and gaps that were open there. So what did I do? I pulled all that insulation out that following spring. I hired a spray foam company to come in and to seal all those joist cavities, and I've never had a problem since. So in conclusion, watch the humidity and the airflow around objects on exterior walls in your home. Now, a good sign that you do have too much moisture in your air or too high a relative humidity is windows condensing and dripping, causing moisture along the bottom sill. Quite often I'll go into homes and people will have towels that are on their sills. These towels in the wintertime may be frozen as they just left them there to soak up the moisture. But there have been even times where I've gone in the summertime and that towel is musty and moldy. So don't just put something there to soak it up. Make sure you're taking care of that and asking yourself, why is moisture there? How do I get rid of it? Well, a dehumidifier and air movement throughout the house is two things that you can look at. So this is it for the mold portion of it. I do want to touch base a little bit on asbestos, not too much, but just to bring your awareness up for it. Asbestos was used widely from the 20s to the 80s, and any home that has been constructed or has had renovations in that time may be susceptible and may have asbestos containing material inside these buildings. Now, asbestos is not just found in floor tiles. It's found in drywall, drywall joint compound, plaster skim coat, even on the roof on underlay under old shingles. It's found on floor tiles. It's also found in ceiling tiles. Stipple inside the house, on the ceiling, on the walls, as well as stucco outside, and even mortar that binds chimneys together. So it is found in a lot of locations and people just don't realize it. Now, in watching home renovation shows, I cringe at seeing these contractors just go in and take out plaster walls without first testing it. So if you live in an older home and you're deciding to do some work on your home, ask yourself, was this building built or renovated between the 20s and the 80s? And if so, you may want to look at getting those tested. you can contact a local asbestos remediation company, have them come out and have a look at it, take a sample and submit it for sampling to find out if it does have asbestos. If you do have mold growth in your home, on drywall, on wood, areas that can't be cleaned by simple vinegar and water, non-porous areas, call a mold remediation company. Get them to come out, have a look. Most mold remediation companies will come out and do a free inspection of your home and give you a full report as to how to get rid of it. Don't try to clean it up on your own. And most importantly, do not use bleach. Bleach is probably one of the worst things you can use on mold. What it does is bleach is mostly water and it's got ammonia in it. Now, due to the ionic structure of ammonia, it doesn't readily absorb into porous materials like concrete or like drywall. And what happens is it goes into the air and you get that bleach smell, that ammonia smell. So you've now put ammonia into the air of your home. The mold has sensed that ammonia and immediately releases its spores into the air because it wants to survive. You then wipe that mold off, and yes, it does clean it and it looks good. But what's happening is that moisture, that 90% plus moisture, is then absorbing into the concrete or into the wood or into the drywall, and it's feeding those roots of that mold. So eventually it will come back. There are off-the-shelf products that you can buy and treat that mold in your home. They are not 100%, maybe 80 to 85%. If you catch it early on enough, you may get lucky with it. But if it does come back, please contact a professional. I thank you for watching. Until next week, this is Mark with Breathe Easy Eco Solutions and the 10 Acre Woods.